You're a good man, Arthur Morgan. Good man.
Good man.
Howdy everyone, hopefully you guys are ready for this video today, where today we will be covering the Pinkertons. So without further ado, let me just give a little preface before, we kind of dive on in. So, starting with the preface, initially I was playing Red Dead Redemption 2, and obviously throughout the story you kind of come across some officer looking people called the Pinkertons. And obviously, they're very pivotal to the story, at least with how far I'm at. I'm about chapter 5, so it's pretty interesting, knowing about them. And then later on, I knew bits and pieces of it, but I kind of figured out, just by looking a little bit into it, that they were an actual agency during this time and, throughout history. So I thought it'd be pretty cool to just cover them, give you the, history around them. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So without further ado, let's jump right on in. So first, before we kind of move on, I'm going to give a brief description of Allan throughout his childhood and then kind of move on from there. So he was born on August 21st of 1819, where during his time as a child, he was very poor. He grew up in a very poor household with his father doing very, low paying work, and the mother and his sister kind of working as cleaners in a train station, I believe, if I'm correct. But that's what they did during that time. And sadly, Allan's father would pass away when he was about 10 years old, and after that he would have to leave school during this period in order to help his mom with basically paying the bills and stuff like that. So he would do that during this time, but his mom would encourage him to continue studying, which is what he did. He would study in his free time and then go work whenever he could. I believe he would work as one of those kids that would bring stuff to workers and factories. That's what I believe he did. I could be correct, but I'm pretty sure that's what it's about. But so obviously during this time of him studying and doing his own work, he would actually, be able to get a better job in the form of barrel making. So that's what he would do during his time. And obviously after time where he grew up, he became very political, doing his own political party from what I could recall. And obviously he would meet a woman, they would get married, and eventually he would move to the US, where he started up his own barrel making business. As back then he actually got a job doing barrels. So obviously he brought that back to the States, and that's basically what he did with his business during that period of time. And so during the time of him managing his barrel making business, he would actually discover a gang of counterfeiters while he was wandering the wooded groves of Dundee, and so he would obviously have them arrested. The story that it went, as far as I could recall, he apparently was just walking through the woods doing his stroll that he regularly does, and obviously found some strange lights, decided to go investigate, found what they were doing. So with the general story of this specific event, from what I could find, it seems that he had a routine of just strolling around the wooded groves, and so obviously he found some strange lights happening not that far off in the distance, decided to go investigate, found these people doing some shady stuff, decided to go back to town and talk to the officer, telling him. And during this time he had a very good reputation, so obviously the officer believed him and said, okay, we'll go and investigate. So that would happen, they would investigate, and they would just basically wait for the right time to strike, which is when they made the arrest. And as a result of this, he would be appointed as deputy sheriff, and then eventually would be appointed as special agent to the US Postal Office, where he would continue to catch criminals. And in 1850, Allan would meet with a Chicago attorney named Edward Rucker, where they would meet at a Masonic hall, and soon eventually would create the Northwestern Police Agency, which would eventually become the Pinkerton Agency, with the motto, "We never sleep." And apparently they're the reason why we call independent detectives private eyes, which is pretty cool. And so Allan would use his skills of espionage, which would attract new clients, and this would be actually the starting point of his business growing over time. And that's not to mention that they also originally specialized in train robbery cases, or the protection of trains, or even the arrest of train robbers. And by the mid-1850s, Allan would actually consult with 6 Midwestern railroads, which is when the agency was created in Chicago during this time. And an interesting fact about the Pinkertons is that during this period of time, they would actually hire women and minorities as spies during this period of time, and it was obviously very uncommon for obvious reasons. But I think it was very genius on their part in order to hire, these types of people, because obviously you wouldn't really expect it out of them to gather any sort of information, especially since, there's wives and stuff who have all sorts of gossip and they can listen in on their husbands. So it was really a great source of information that he could use during this time. So in my opinion, that was pretty interesting, very effective. And it also turned out that Allan was also an abolitionist. And for those who don't know what an abolitionist is, it's basically someone with the movement to end slavery or the liberation of, groups of slaves. And the reason for this is that as early as 1844, he would actually work with the abolitionist leader during this time and would use his home as one of the stops for the Underground Railroad. So those are pretty interesting facts to know about Allan specifically. And just to keep in mind that this was also the period where he was still deputy sheriff, so just imagine, a lawman stopping law, but also breaking the law in terms of helping slaves. And also, just a quick little mention, he was also pro-union, and that probably won't make sense if you don't know much about him or the agency, but you'll kind of understand a little bit later into the video, but he was pro-union. Now, if you've ever seen the Pinkerton logo, there's actually a story behind that, kind of groups up with the "We Never Sleep" motto as well. And the story behind that is that during this time, it was one of the earlier operations of the Pinkertons, and the operation was to secure the newly elected President Lincoln from Seattle to Washington, as during this time he was receiving death threats, and obviously he had to pass through the South as he was doing a tour, and because of that, they were obviously doing an operation to keep him safe during this period of time, which I will, go through. And as the story goes, the Pinkertons discovered of a plot where a group of men wanted to gun down the newly elected president at the Baltimore train station, where obviously once they found out about this, they decided to put their best agent on the case. And this detective being Detective Kate Warren, who was obviously not seen as the typical archetype for a spy, especially, during that time where they would assume, a man would be the best image of what you would imagine a spy would be. But she was described as being very smart, very clever, and a master of disguises. So Warren devised a plan in which she would buy a big floppy hat and an obviously worn overcoat and have him wear that, and she would actually teach him to walk like he was crippled, and because she taught him and disguised him very well, they would then take the train to Baltimore. So when they arrived in Baltimore, Lincoln, obviously in disguise, would begin to, step off the train station and walk past the assassins, who would take no notice of him, as obviously these assassins were looking for a 6'4" confident politician. And obviously that's not the aura he was giving. The aura that he was giving was actually, of a dirty, crippled man who had a caretaker with him who was actually worn in disguise. And so that's how they were able to basically escape the assassins. And so they escaped the assassins, where they would then take the train to Washington, where during this time Lincoln would actually sleep during the night, and Warren would actually stay awake all night just to keep an eye on him to make sure that he was safe, which is where we get the motto and the logo. So once they arrived in Washington, Lincoln would step off the train, thank Warren and Allan for helping him, get to safety, where he would then continue on his way to his inauguration. And because of this operation, this would increase the fame of the Pinkertons even more. And it's pretty cool to find out the fact that the logo and the model had to do with, an operation involving the president. So in terms of the story behind it, I think it is a very cool, interesting story behind it. And yeah, that's all I gotta say on that. Now, there seems to be some contention in terms of the plot being real, in terms of the events being real. Yes, that did actually happen, but there's obviously some contention that I saw of people saying that it wasn't Warren who was keeping an eye on Lincoln, it was actually Allan himself, but I'm sticking with Warren being more likely. But aside from that, the plot, a lot of people suspect that it might not be true, but there's no real evidence to point one way or the other. There's some saying that, he obviously told a lie to Lincoln in order to gain political gain or to increase the fame of his agency, but there's no evidence to disprove it, but there's also not much evidence to obviously prove anything. At least from what I was able to gather, it mostly came from word of mouth of Pinkerton agents, like finding some things revolving around it, along with some other people mentioning of a possible plot, and from historical context, the state that he was visiting did not support him at all. I don't know how much votes he got, but it was like less than a couple thousand, I think. So in terms of him not being popular there, there's like a lot of evidence proving that it's at least very likely that someone obviously wanted to kill him. Oh, and just another side fact, apparently Lincoln did know of Allan, and he actually highly regarded Allan as being honest, so that is one of the main reasons why he believed him in the first place, because he saw that he was honest, or at least through his work and stuff like that, he saw that he was an honest person. So he obviously believed them. So yeah. And so Allan during this time would actually work in the then Secret Service intelligence branch, which during that time was actually called the U.S. War Department, where he would be basically the one who would gather information for the president. And all this would culminate in the creation of the Secret Service, which was created in July 5th, 1865, which obviously still serves today, where their main goal is the protection of former and current presidents. And so in 1871, Congress would appropriate $50,000, which, counting for inflation and all that stuff, would equal to $1.3 million for the Department of Justice for them to create a sub-organization which would be created and devoted to, quote, detection and prosecution of those guilty of violating federal law. But this amount of money wasn't enough for an internal investigation team, so they would basically hire through third party, which would be the Pinkertons. But sooner or later, the Pinkertons would actually kind of transition away from their original goal of basically apprehending criminals and more in the transition of breaking strikes. With even one story of a Pinkerton agent infiltrating the Western Federation of Miners, where they would basically use the relief funds of those miners in order to basically bribe any workers that are protesting and basically giving them benefits and stuff like that, and trying to exhaust as much of the fund as they could in order to basically get most of those workers back in, or to basically break the strike with the amount of money that they would try to exhaust from their resources. And it would be this shift where lawmakers would start pushing against making government contracts with the Pinkertons, but it wouldn't reach its peak until the 1870s to the 1880s, where during this period of time, the Pinkertons would actually get more violent with their crackdowns against protesters. And one such example would be the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, but it wouldn't be until the Homestead Massacre of 1892 where things really showed the difference of how much they've changed from back when they first initially started, in which the Amalgamated Association for Iron and Steel Workers, also known as the AA, striked against the Carnegie Steel Company because during this time they were increasing their production, they were increasing their efficiency, but were not giving fair pay for their workers. And so the Pinkerton agency would send about 300 workers, all armed with Winchester rifles, to the factory, but it was reported that many of these were just employees that were living in logging houses and weren't really associated with the Pinkertons, and that they were reportedly paid about, it says $2.50 a day, which for inflation and stuff like that, it'd be like $86.60 something cents, which that's pretty good pay, but they were not prepared for what was about to happen. And so Pinkerton agents would make their way to the plant by boat, under fire by many of the families who were striking against them. And there is no real concrete evidence to show who fired first. There is one person that was hit by the strikers saying that the strikers started firing first, saying that they shot like 2 Pinkertons dead, and that's when they retaliated, although the New York Times posted something on the contrary. So it all depends on what you prefer to believe on, on that testimony or a different one. So there's no real concrete evidence. And so while they made their way to shore, another crowd would begin to throw stones and rocks at the barges, under the wishes of the leaders of the protest. And of course, there would be gunfire shared between both sides, with them even including cannons and even boats with oil being set on fire, trying to blow up the boats. Not to mention dynamite was also used. It didn't end up killing anyone, but there were like very close calls with a lot of the boats getting close to the dynamite and just very close to blowing up. But it did end up with deaths and with injuries, and I'm just going to read them because I do not want to bother reading the numbers and remembering them over and over again. So it resulted with 7 dead and 11 injured on the strikers side, and this was like an average. It said that it was around 3 to 8 dead and 12 to 36 injured on the Pinkerton side. And because of this strike, Congress would actually begin to take action against the Pinkertons, where they would create the Anti-Pinkerton Law of 1893, I believe, in which they were not allowed, like in terms of the government, they were not allowed to hire any agencies or mercenaries, any kind of third party, kind of similar to the Pinkertons. There's another one, but I don't remember their names, but they were not allowed to hire them, which definitely strained relationships between the Pinkertons and the government. Now, they do have a dark history in their later years, but that's not to say that they didn't do any good. Obviously, they were able to capture some outlaws, or at least track down some of them, such as Jesse James, the Reno Gang, Butch Cassidy and his Wild Bunch, just to name a few. Now, they didn't catch James, but they were able to get the Reno gang, and funny enough, Butch Cassidy and his Wild Bunch were actually the inspiration of the Vanderlyn gang of Red Dead Redemption 2, which I will talk about in a little bit, but for now, we'll keep going. And so once we started moving into the more modern times, the Pinkertons started to diversify, mostly because of their reputation with breaking strikes. They started to diversify from labor spying into other avenues, with also their criminal detection work also dying down as the modernization of the police started to come into effect, with also increased funding for the FBI, the creation of different detective agency branches, and also with the increased funding to the police. So those were the main reasons why that section started to die down for them. And so they would begin to shift over to protection services such as threat intelligence, risk management, executive protection, and active shooter response. And by the end of the 1960s, the word detective would also be removed from their agency's letterhead. And the company would eventually be bought by Securitas AB, which was a security company in about 1999 for about $384 million, which it's a good amount of money. And soon the Pinkertons' rival company, the William J. Burns DA, would also be bought out by the same company to create the Securitas Security Service USA. And now we're going to step into the more modern controversies that happened with the Pinkertons. One of them I actually do recall, so this will be definitely interesting for you. So obviously one of them was them sending a cease and desist to Rockstar's Red Dead Redemption 2 because they didn't like the fact that they were using the Pinkerton name and badge in the game in December of 2018. And obviously that they wanted royalties for every copy of the game that they sold, or else they would take legal action. And Rockstar's parent company, Take-Two, would argue the fact that the Pinkerton name was strongly associated with the Wild West, so therefore using the name in terms of using it in the Wild West did not really infringe on the Pinkerton trademark. And it wouldn't be until 2019 where Securitas would drop those claims. Like in 2020, Amazon would actually hire the Pinkertons to have their employees spy on the Amazon workers in order to find any sort of union forming or them thinking of striking, which is not far-fetched from Amazon. You know, I wouldn't put it past them. And not to mention that also in 2022, Starbucks would do the same thing, but they would actually hire, I don't know if it was like a CEO or some person in a hired position that was an ex-Pinkerton agent, but in terms of accuracy, I believe that there is some suspicion that she never worked for the Pinkertons, but it's just there, just to let you know. And in the same year of the Amazon spying, Matthew Doloff, who was an unlicensed security officer who was contracted by the Pinkertons, would actually be ordered to protect I think it's News 9 News, in which it ended up resulting in him shooting and fatally killing Lee Keltner, I believe his name was. And so my initial thoughts were that Doloff was basically off his rockers. He was a loose cannon who was ready to kill someone. But when you actually look into the article, it showed a lot more context. From what I was able to gather, there was a protest happening with Keltner being one of those protesters. And there was an anti-protest group in which Keltner was starting to basically have an altercation with the anti-protesters. So Doloff was trying to get in between them to try to break up them fighting and stuff like that. But then Keltner started to make threats on the film crew. So that's when Doloff had to get in between them to basically protect them from Keltner doing anything to them. And so Keltner, holding a can of bear spray, would slap Doloff. So Doloff would basically pull out his gun and shoot him right as Keltner was about to spray him with the bear spray. And Doloff would be charged with murder, but eventually those charges would be dropped because he would actually plea for self-defense, which, I mean, in terms of what it is, I mean, it's the best he's got and it works because obviously he attacked him first, so it stands. Do I think it was right for him to shoot a man just because he slapped the fuck out of him? No, but I mean, what can you really do? Does it seem extreme? Yep, it seems really extreme. I mean, the bear spray, I can kind of see why you might feel a little threatened, but I don't think you should ever pull a gun in that situation. I mean, just do fisticuffs or whatever. I don't know, but there could have been a better situation for that without pulling a gun. But I mean, it's just me, and what am I going to do? So for this one, I'm going to read it a little bit because it's just a lot, and I don't know Magic the Gathering, so in 2023, the Magic the Gathering creators would actually hire the Pinkertons to seize what is called the March of the Machine, the Aftermath card set from YouTuber Dan Cannon, because apparently he released a video where it showed that he had the cards before they were even released. He just got like early access to them and he wasn't supposed to. And the Pinkertons obviously would intimidate and threaten him with the fact that he could face up to 10 years in jail, or that he would have to pay a fine of $200,000 if he didn't return the product. And there is an article from Kotaku from Dan, who sent an email once they asked him about the situation, where he said, "They also said if I didn't hand over the product, they would call the county sheriff and detain us until they arrived to arrest us and search my house for the product, and that they would most likely force us to show receipts for every magic card in the house." Which, I mean, I don't collect Pokemon, Magic. I used to collect Yu-Gi-Oh! Those were really cool. But I can see why he would be very worried for that, because at least for me, I don't keep receipts of card sets that I get. And obviously there's probably like a lot of money he has that he doesn't want to lose if they just start searching everything and start getting all his cards. So I could see why he felt threatened to give him the cards. But in terms of Kotaku asking anything from the Pinkertons, they never responded to him. So yeah, I don't know. I do recall this story specifically. I do remember bits and pieces of it. I think Philip DeFranco brought it up in a story a while ago, and I thought it was crazy. But I do remember bits and pieces of this and how the Pinkertons were being really aggressive to this guy. Yeah, there's just one of the few stories that I do recall, surprisingly, about the Pinkertons, even though, you know, now that I know more about them because of the game, it's kind of interesting to know that, you know, they're still around and doing all that stuff. Now, this was very interesting, covering the Pinkertons, knowing the fact that they actually did exist in real life. They were an actual agency, and that they are still around today, but they are very scary. That is very interesting. One other thing that was very interesting to me was the fact that Allan was a very good guy. At least the founder of the Pinkertons, he was originally a very great guy. He was pro-union, he was anti-slavery. So the fact that he actually was a part of the Underground Railroad is very interesting to me. The fact that he saved the president, as far as we know, and the fact that once he passed away, the shift that they started to do into more strike breaking is very sad, to the fact that originally they were very good. They were a great organization who done a lot of good, and then after the passing of the founder, that's when things started to go to shit with them breaking strikes, which is against the wishes of, you know, him. And the fact that they are still around to this day, operating, and now that they do security and stuff like that, I still think it's pretty interesting. In terms of me having a favorable view of them, I do not have a favorable view of them, at least from everything that I was able to find. It doesn't seem like they have a good reputation to me, now more in the modern times, but it's more of how they handle things. So yeah, I just don't think highly of them. They have an interesting story, I'll give them that. But yeah, I think that's it for this video. In terms of any updates. Okay, so now we reach the end. In terms of future updates, you will get a video this month, which is this one that you're watching right now. In terms of next month, I do not know if I'm gonna make a video, because I do have a lot of personal plans coming up on December. So I don't know if I'm gonna consider it a vacation time, or if I am going to upload something that I'm just having there. I'm not going to make any guarantees, but in January, you could probably look forward to maybe 1 or 2, or at the very least one 1-hour video. So I don't know. I'm not going to guarantee anything, because I guaranteed an upload date with Dead Mall, and obviously I was a bit late on that one, but I'm not going to make any promises, but like, I'll give a rough time frame. So I don't know if I have anything else. Yeah, I just have a lot of projects. I just want to make sure I have a backlog, so that way if there's anything that happens personal life wise, and I have that and shoot one out. But yeah, I think that's anything that I have for the future. Thank you to anyone and everyone who watched the videos, who like it. Those who have subscribed, thank you. It really means the world. It feels really good to know that, you know, you enjoy a little bit of the content that I'm, you know, bringing out. But yeah, I think that's about it. Honestly, thank you. I'm gonna try to put more effort into making shorts. It's just I don't have a lot of time to do shorts. Like, my schedule is pretty weird, and so getting videos out, it's a lot. But yeah, without further ado, hope you have a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good night. Till next time, see you later.